All right, so thank you everybody for joining us here tonight. Thank you for participating in this IDCCA virtual training. We're very happy to have you all here. I'm going to go over just a few ground rules for the training, and then we'll turn it over to IDCCA President Christina Zahorik. First of all, everybody will be muted during the meeting. That's just to keep things running smoothly. If you have any questions, there is a chat box down at the bottom, and we'll ask that you put questions there. We'll have a Q&A period at the end, and I will read off those questions. Second of all, please be respectful to one another. We have some new people on the call tonight, some people with a lot of experience, so just be respectful and realize there are no stupid questions. Finally, please be present. This training isn't going to last very long, so please try to be present. If you need something to drink, go get it now, but otherwise, please try to stay on for the whole training. All right, and without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to IDCCA President Christina Zahorik to introduce us.
Hello, everyone again. Some of you, this is, as Dave said in the chat box, this is 3 nights in a row. That's amazing. It's great to see everybody on this call. As Gillian Hawkins mentioned, I am the president of the Illinois Democratic County Chairs Association, and I am the chair out in McHenry County. And these training sessions, I think, are really great and useful, particularly to provide kind of an overview perspective, as well as the ability to ask really kind of detailed and specific questions from some of the folks that are members of our leadership circle here for the IDCCA. And Gillian is one of those that has stepped up. She has a lot of experience. I'm going to share some of that with you, and is a really useful, I think, and important touchstone on issues of campaigning in particular. So Gillian has over a dozen years of campaign experience that includes field and political roles in 2 presidential campaigns. Gillian led the women's outreach efforts for President Barack Obama's historic Iowa Caucus win, and served as the Florida Director of Scheduling in 2008. Gillian's resume includes multiple statewide and legislative elections. Her experience extends to progressive nonprofits, where she was the National Director of Campaigns for J Street and the Executive Director of the Illinois Women's Institute for Leadership, empowering and training women on how to run winning campaigns. And I think that the information she's going to impart tonight is really useful, giving kind of a bigger perspective as to what it is that we're trying to do this election cycle in particular. So Gillian, it's off to you, and thank you for being here tonight.
Okay, you're unmuted here.
There we go. Great. All right, everyone can hear me now? Yes, just thumbs up. Good. Okay, we're going to assume so. Great. I'm going to share my screen really quickly. Gillian, you have to give me, I love having another Gillian. We're not that common, so having another Gillian is very exciting. So you have to give me access to share my screen if that's okay.
You should be able
that will
to.
Work. Perfect. There we go. Awesome. All right. So vote by mail best practices. A little bit more about who I am. Christina, I love that you found that bio. I think that's still on our website, and a reminder that I have to update it, which is awesome because I think it's about 5 years old. But who I am and why do I talk about vote by mail a lot? Some of you might have been on the Democratic Party of Illinois training last week, where I did a very brief version of this presentation. So I'm a direct mail consultant. I work with Democratic campaigns across the country. My focus of my practice is working with women, particularly on congressional and legislative races, both here in Illinois, across the Midwest, and then the country. My firm has really focused on studying vote by mail best practices, along with an organization called the Analyst Institute, which is based in Washington, D.C., and actually runs experiments and gathers information on how to be more effective in campaigns and using campaign tactics. Specifically around get out the vote tactics And so one of those things that have been used in states broadly, and not as much really here in Illinois, is using vote by mail as a tool to turn people out to vote. So we've actually worked on a lot of campaigns and then conducted experiments in states that do 100% vote by mail, and actually worked in them as they transitioned from allowing some people to vote by mail and having large portions vote by mail to being 100% vote by mail in ballot states. So those are Washington State, Oregon, and Colorado. We also have worked really closely in states like Iowa. Iowa has used for 20 years no-fault vote by mail to increase turnout. And so a lot of this comes from just right over the Mississippi of stuff that we've really studied extensively in Iowa, and how to really have best practices to increase people's response to voting by mail. So with that being said, oops, one too many. There we go. So just, I know most of you already know all this, but very brief overview of some of the updates. And I am not a lawyer, but this is just a very, very, very brief update, and kind of the reason why we're having this call today, of the updates to the 2020 law. So Election Day is now a state holiday. They've extended the in-person early vote days and times. And local election authorities must now send a vote by mail application to anyone who's voted in the 2018 primary, the 2018 general election, the 2019 municipal election, or the 2020 primary. And the application may be emailed or mailed by USPS. Some of those key dates in Illinois, and I think this is really one of the most important things to keep in mind as we talk about everything tonight. And I pretty much printed out a document pretty similar to this and like pasted it right in front of my computer for all of my Illinois races, because this really marks and should be touchstones and guides for how you plan all of your activity, both in get out the vote and encouraging people to vote by mail and chasing and bringing back ballots in, but also any of your persuasion, communication, and field efforts should really be built upon the framework of these dates. So first is July 25th, county clerks are able to send applications to voters. August 1st is the estimated date mail-in ballot applications will arrive in mailboxes. September 15th, the Secretary of State will send the first reminder to application recipients. September 24th, and this is really the big one, clerks begin sending ballots to voters. October 6th, clerks are required to send ballots if applications have been received by October 1st. That's also the really big one. October 15th, the second follow-up reminder to application recipients from the Secretary of State. October 29th, vote by mail application deadline. And then November 3rd is obviously Election Day. One of the great things in our state is that ballots must be postmarked by election date. There's a lot of states that require people to actually have it, their ballot actually be at the election authority on that day. I saw that there were a bunch of questions, Gillian. Do you want me to stop for a half a second and take those?
Sure. Yeah, I know we got some questions about like when is the last day the clerk is allowed to send these applications to voters?
You know what, I don't have that right in front of me, but I believe it's sometime in October, late October, when is the last day, and it's really, when is the last day that the clerk is supposed to send the application? That's August 1st. That's what that date is. The last date that you can, I'll look up, or Gillian or if someone can look up the date, the last date that applications are due and may be accepted. Oh, it's on here. That's October 29th. So we can talk about that later. Let's put a pin in that and remind me to talk about when we kind of finish this presentation. When is the last time you should be encouraging people to request an application, knowing that the application deadline is October 29th? I don't know if that kind of helps a little bit. What's this? What are accepted reasons for those applications for not being sent to voters? I don't know why wouldn't a clerk send an application to a voter? that they don't meet the criteria that we kind of previously talked about of which elections that they've participated in. I think that's the only reason they can't send an application to someone as part of the one time that they send applications. What we're going to talk about today, and the reason why I kind of framed all of this, is there's going to be people that are not in the universe that get applications from the clerk or from, you know, another entity or from other campaigns in your area. And so there are things that you can do as a county chair to make sure that there are good Democrats that are less frequent voters that they get an application. So there's two steps to getting to people to actually vote by mail. The first is to think about the process of getting them to apply for a mail-in ballot. The second is the process of getting them to actually return a completed ballot. And a lot of the rules for that apply to both of those situations. So if I talk about applications or ballot chase, most of the rules are almost identical. For most of this presentation, I'll talk about application, and then I'll dig in a little bit on what the differences are for a ballot chase. So there's three principles to improving voter engagement. The first one is to zig where others zag. The second one is to sandwich your communication. And the third one is to layer communication. So first, what do I mean by zigzag? So when I say that, it's really to think about that you don't live in a vacuum. Your resources are limited, especially as county chairs. You know, you don't have the resources that our governor, frankly, is going to have to be able to, you know, apply a lot of these principles, or that, you know, like campaigns, competitive congressional races or competitive legislative races are going to have. So really think through, for your county candidates, what are the holes that are missing? What is everyone else doing? So we know that the election authority, most of the time the county clerk, is going to be sending applications to people. But who is sending applications to the people who are not getting applications from your local election authority? Likewise, within that, you know, I think we're going to all have more details, and let's talk about this at the end, because I'm not a spokesperson for Vote Yes, and I don't want to speak on their behalf, but they're going to have a pretty aggressive program to target a lot of good Democrats who fall outside of the universe that the local election authority is targeting with applications. So, but who are those people? Who is Vote Yes not sending applications to? Who are people that you want to engage at a local level for your local races that you want to make sure vote? And really thinking through within the universe, who's doing what and where are places where you can really fill a hole. Likewise, within that, and we'll dig into more by what I mean by sandwiching and layering communication, but who is sending a second reminder to these people? Like, are they getting one reminder, you know, from the county election authority and Vote Yes, but maybe you need to send a second or third reminder? And who is sending, you know, once those applications have arrived, who's making the phone calls or sending an additional piece of mail or sending text messages to people to remind them that they have that application, that they have that ballot and they need to return it. And then also, and that's kind of what type of reminders are they sending? And that's what I mean by is it phones, is it mail, is it a text message, is it an email, is it a digital ad? Really think through who's doing what where. It's kind of like a puzzle, and looking for that missing puzzle piece and being able to really influence an election and voters with filling in those puzzle pieces. So sandwiching. Sandwiching is something that I think is not actually, you know, we think when people receive an application, we know to let them know you have an application and then remind them that it's still there. One thing that people don't think about, and this is the piece that's really been very, very widely tested, is to actually preview and alert people that their application or that their ballot is coming. This just increases efficacy and your return on investment to just let people know that it's coming. Also, I think in this day and age, very interestingly, Lucy Moog, who's the chairperson for the 43rd Ward in Chicago, pointed out to me that the city of Chicago vote by mail application that they emailed out to everyone looks like junk mail. It looks like junk spam email. And I'll show you an example of applications, but they should and do look very basic. And it's very easy for someone to overlook that and throw that out. Remember, a lot of the people that you're targeting, all of the people that are on this call and people who are like-minded, we're all going to jump at the chance to fill out our vote by mail application and send in our ballot. It's really talking to low information voters, less partisan voters, and people that are infrequent voters, and reminding them that their application is coming and that it's important that they fill it out. So really previewing it for them is a very important piece to increase the return rate of an application. Second is letting people know that their application has arrived or their ballot has arrived. And we have some of those ways, and there's ways in Vote Builder that you can also track when those things are sent. And then after a couple days, reminding them, hey, your application is still at home. Have you returned it? Your ballot, especially with ballots, you still have your ballot. Have you returned it? And really reminding people to do that. So really thinking of it as a sandwich with the meat, if you will, if we stay with this metaphor, being either the application or the ballot and when that arrives at home. The next piece is layering in that communication. So when we are talking about sandwiching, within each of those three actions, we also want to layer those as much as possible. And what I mean is using the multiple of tools that we have in our toolbox to engage with voters. So common ones are obviously sending people emails. That's easy. Everyone can do that. That should be free. Send out an email. Let people know their application is coming, it's there, and that they still have it, and remind them to return it. Next, in some cases, you can actually send a piece of mail. I don't really like to use that as a preview. Sometimes the application is the actual piece of mail, but they have shown that it's pretty effective to send a follow-up postcard reminding people that their application is still at home and that they need to send it back. What's even more effective is with ballots. And we'll talk about that actually in a little bit more detail, but sending a postcard reminding people that they have their ballot at home, giving them the legal parameters that they need to sign it and have it postmarked by Election Day is really an effective way of encouraging people to return their ballot. Also, text messages are really effective. You can pull people's cell phones out of Vote Builder if you know that they've got an application and that that they have their ballot. Using peer-to-peer texting, things like Hustle, and I know there's another one too that you can use with just volunteers. You can also pay to do it. It's like 10 cents a text. It's very, very cheap to do that. Reminding people, especially younger people, that they have an application or a ballot at home is really useful. One great thing we have in Illinois is you can apply for an application online. So you can include in a text message like, hey, you have your application at home, but here's also a link to apply if you can't find it. That's an incredibly effective mode of encouraging people to apply for a vote by mail ballot. The other thing is using field, and who knows what that obviously looks like in a pandemic. I say field and the doors here and phones being volunteer-led phone calls. So if you have a good group of volunteers, giving them a list of people, especially people who are infrequent voters that are getting an application from your local election authority or from another group on a certain day, having a volunteer say, hey, I live down the street from you. I'm just letting you know that you received a vote by mail application today. This election is so important. Can you, please, make sure you fill it out and send it back. Likewise with ballots, if people have had a ballot for a week, having people call and be like, hey, I live down the street from you, and, I know you've had your ballot for a week, make sure you fill it out, sign it, and send it back, and it needs to be postmarked by the election. It's so important that everyone's voice counts. Those are very, very effective tactics for getting people to return an application and a ballot. Likewise, doors are really important to do that. I'm not going to dig into that too much because I just don't think we're going to be able to do it this cycle. But if things change, there are some rules and laws that you can actually help take the ballot and return it. And applications, you can absolutely go to a door and have someone fill out an application and then return it to the county clerk yourself. So people really use that pretty widely. Definitely need to know your local rules or just basic what people expect and will be comfortable with locally, but that's also a really good way to remind people. One other thing that I'm encouraging a lot of my clients to do is you can get oversized sticky notes. I'm sharing my screen, so you probably can't actually see me, but I'll show you at the end. They're really cheap. They're actually cheaper than door hangers, and it looks almost like you got a delivery from UPS or FedEx, and you can put it on there and just say, hey, just a reminder to fill out a vote by mail application, or a reminder to return your ballot. And that's almost like a lit drop, but something a little bit more tactically and strategically thought through to really kind of provide social pressure for people to do that. Finally, calls. Paid live calls or robocalls are a really effective and inexpensive way to layer in and help a campaign. I always tell people, if you have last minute money, I would spend it, for me, I would spend that on live calls, encouraging people to return ballots, or depending on where you are in the process, fill out an application. But especially when we're talking about Ballot Chase, I think it's incredibly effective to have an actual human being on the phone, encouraging people to return calls. And from those of you that are in communities that have a large Latinx population, you can actually do that with a bilingual call center. My firm actually works with a phone vendor that does that, and that's been something we've been doing increasingly. And I think that that's really, we've seen in the primary this cycle that that's been a really effective way to increase turnout with voters of color. Okay. All right, let's see, keep going. All right, rules for optimizing vote by mail application programs. So one, you actually want to print them in black and white. It makes it a lot cheaper, but two, I love when I do that. A and B, we'll start with 1 and 2 because they're actually numbered on here. 1 is printing in black and white is cheaper, but it also is more effective. And, you know, I mentioned that organization, the Analyst Institute. We've actually done a lot of research, and they've done a lot of research on that specifically, of kind of stripping out, you know, American flags and, you know, pictures of candidates, but making it be as basic as possible and printing it in black and white. That really is the most effective. It also, they did this really crazy thing in 2016. This is how Hillary Clinton spent her money, another conversation for another day, but they did a lot of focus groups on what had voters keep their eyes on a mail piece longer. And for things like vote by mail and, you know, chase piece, like GOTV materials, black and white, or a lot of negative space, white space, actually people spent more time looking at mail like that. So if you're sending a vote by mail application printed in black and white, it's cheaper and it's more effective, so you might as well do that. You also want it to sound official and use official language and terminology. I'll show you an example, but I think probably everyone's seen what the Democratic Party of Illinois has done over the past few years. It comes from Jesse White, and it, you know, is a letter, and inside there's an application. That's really some of the best practices that you want to do. I would do even less and take out any candidate's name, or any, even you're from a county party. I would not put that you're from the Democratic Party. Like, you know, if you're in Kane County, or, you know, I would just, or McHenry County, like Christina, you know, I would just say McHenry County vote by mail application included inside. Be sure to send back by this date, you know, postage included. Really, you want to make it sound local and not have any mention of the Democratic Party or of any candidate. That doesn't mean we're targeting people who aren't Democrats. It just means that that is the way for less frequent voters to encourage them to fill out an application. 3 is that depending on, there's actually some, a little bit out there on how much Illinois can do, but we can actually pre-fill some of the key fields on an application and do that really inexpensively. We can also legally highlight which fields are required. So we can actually use like yellow highlighter. It does make it a slight bit more expensive because now you're adding another color, but especially the signature line, you can actually highlight that for people and make sure that they're sending it out. They're filling in their signature when they send it back. And you can also pre-fill key fields like someone's name, their birth date, their address, things like that. I typically don't actually do the birth date and address because it creeps people out too much. I think you actually get a little bit of backlash, but I can definitely fill in people's names, especially if you have any concern that they've maybe moved, and that way the person that if they've moved, the person that lives there, if they're not a Democrat, they can't actually use it. So that's something to think about, but that does help encourage people to return applications. The other thing is to send multiple waves of request forms. The goal is 3 for any target universe, and that can include the one that comes from the local election authority, so from the county clerks. I think of that as 1. So thinking through where the next 2 going to come from. I think that Pritzker's looking at 3 or 4, which frankly, there's a lot of data that shows that once you get to 3 and 4, you really just lose your return on investment. It's not that they're ineffective, they're just not more effective. So really the goal is 3 pieces of materials that are, 3 applications to people. And within that, that could mean an additional 3 follow-up postcards. That obviously gets really expensive, but that's kind of in an ideal situation, that's what it would look like. The other thing, and obviously this can be cost prohibitive, but if you're talking to people who are infrequent voting Democrats, prepaying for the return postage on application is the best way to get them to return it. And the USPS has actually changed their system on how they do it. It's very, very easy to do now. It's about 58 cents to return an application using their SurePost. I think it's called SurePost or something close to that. Either way, it's very easy to do and set up, and most union printers and mail shops should be able to help you do that. If not, you can reach out to me, and either my firm can help you do that or I can actually point you in the right direction. A little bit more on sandwiched and layering best practices. Preview and chasing each round of vote by mail application can increase the response rates, helping get more efficiencies out of your budget. We talked about that a little bit, but here's kind of some best practices in the timing. So you want to remember, send that alert or preview that people are getting their application or ballot. Do that 2 to 4 days before each wave of applications, or 2 to 4 days before they might receive their ballot. You want to chase that application or ballot with calls and text messages and other elements that we've discussed 1 to 3 days after each application arrives. And then for mail and text messages, emails, and social media, you can also do that 3 to 5 days after and layer that in with a postcard. So I know that sounds a little bit confusing. You want people to get their application, and then within 1 to 3 days, you really want to focus on calls and text messages. If you have the budget to send a Chase postcard, you can also layer that in with more text messages and emails and social media, and you want to do that about 3 to 5 days after each application arrives. So, you know, let's say September 15th, you know, the application is scheduled to arrive in homes. For September 15th through September 18th, you're going to be calling people and texting them and reminding them that their application is at home. And then on September 19th or 20th, let's just pretend there's no weekends during this day. On September 19th and 20th, you would want your follow-up postcard to arrive in homes, and you would want to layer that in with more calls and text messages to people who haven't filled out the application. There are never too many calls. You should obviously go through your list and remove people who have returned their application or returned their ballot just to be efficient and get to everyone. But I really feel in this era, you just can't call people too much. And the similar rules apply for ballots as well. Obviously, once someone returns their ballot, you know, we're done with them. They voted. There's nothing else we can do there. You know, a lot of this timing applies there as well. Common problems and notes. I mentioned this a little bit earlier. Signatures. That is the biggest reason why an application or a ballot is invalidated, is people forget to sign their applications and they forget to sign their ballots. It happens all the time. So really every point of communication that you're having, you want to remind people, fill out your application, sign it, send it back. Fill out your ballot, sign it, send it back. That should just become part of the words that you're saying all the time to everyone, including good Democrats. I think that's actually another thing to really drive home with, you know, high partisan good Democrats that we know have vote by mail, that we know have mail-in ballots, is really reminding them that they need to sign their ballot and send it back. We already talked about this. Applications should look official. Do not mention candidates or the Democratic Party. Keep your response rates and expectations in check. Typically response rates around 10 to 15%. I always plan on the low end, you know, plan for the worst, hope for the best, of about 10% per round of application. That's how much effort, literally all of this stuff, and you're only going to get 10% of the people that you send it to actually return the application. I also say that with a caveat. That means 10% of those people are going to return the application you sent to them. In a lot of states where you have online application, you can, people actually will just go and do that online instead of dealing with the finding a pen and filling it out and sending it back. So it's actually probably higher than that, but that is kind of how you should, if you're calculating how many people you need to encourage to get a vote by mail application, you know, I would use that as kind of a math to kind of figure out how many you have to send out and how many rounds you have to send. Also use tested social pressure language to encourage ballots are returned. I'm going to talk about this on the next slide, but there's language that has been extensively studied. You've probably seen it on materials and heard about it in other places. There's language that really encourages people to go out and vote. It's even more true in encouraging them to return a ballot. It's incredibly effective. We actually really just studied this more in a bunch of the primaries that got pushed back, and we're all on June 2nd. And a lot of good Democrats, once they get a ballot in their hands, I mean, they return their ballot right away. And so that's actually pretty effective. But there are obviously about a third of people that are not, you know, frequent voters that need that extra, you know, push to return a ballot. Social pressure really works on them. And I always tell people, when I show it in a second, we'll talk about it. But, you know, we are the people on this call, we are not the targets for that language. Also learn the new data best practices for Vote Builder from the DPI. I know that they're setting it up very specifically using both the new law and who the county clerks are sending their applications to, and also taking into account who Vote Yes is targeting. So really make sure you get from the DPI, and maybe Gillian and Christina are holding additional trainings on this, but really understand, you know, what is the best practices for pulling universes in your county from Vote Builder. So here's sample social pressure language. As I've already previewed, we are not the targets of it. I actually have this argument with my father-in-law all the time because he's a great volunteer for Indivisible, but he's always like, I hate this language. I think it's so, you know, childish. And this has been tested. I can't even explain how many, I mean, we're talking hundreds of experiments and tests have shown that this is the most effective way to turn out people who are infrequent voters. So public records show you are a consistent and reliable voter. Thank you. Public records show you didn't vote in 2018. We have too much on the line in 2020. Make your voice heard. Voting is expected to be high in your neighborhood. Vote. And this is the one that is the most effective, and I know irritates so many people, and that is who you vote for is private, but if you vote is public. And just really encouraging, I include it in everything. I tell my candidates, you know, volunteers are not going to be really fond of using that language. You don't need to push them to do that. It's great for them to talk about. As a neighbor, I really encourage you to vote, but in materials that you're just printing and paying for and a volunteer isn't touching, this is the language that needs to be on your GOTV lit. Here's an example of a vote by mail application. I actually have an Illinois one, but it's, as you guys may probably know, the universal application is still kind of being tweaked. So I don't have it on here, but this is just an example of how we keep things in black and white and how you can kind of pre-fill data and make it really basic. Obviously, all it says here is vote by mail application enclosed, open immediately. And then we kind of put the steps here. And you can see here even really highlighting that people need to sign it. Lastly, I want to talk really quickly. I think most of you know a lot of this stuff, but this is just a very, very brief 50,000-foot level of how to target who you should work for, who you should focus on, who should be your first priority for pushing to get a vote by mail application. So that would be people who are Democrats, not everyone who always votes, so not people like us, but people who sometimes vote. And that's where your GOTV target should be. There's a lot of ways to pull that information. Obviously, there's other things for peer persuasion. I have that on here because I use this slide for a lot of conversations like this and talking about how to do best practices for targeting with mail, but really thinking through, Democrats. You want them to know that they're a strong Democrat. I always say err on the side. The last thing we want is to get, encourage people who are Republicans or not going to vote for our candidates to go out there and vote. So really making sure that people are strong Democrats, and then really focusing on the people that sometimes vote. If you actually have more resources or more time, you can actually move down to this never votes category, people who we think are strong Democrats but very infrequently vote. I actually think that's where there actually might be a lot of room at the local level to increase our numbers, but that's how I would prioritize your efforts and where you spend your resources. That's it. Let me fill this out so I can see all of your lovely faces, and then I know that there's a chat bar. There it is. Here we go, chat. Perfect. So I know there's a few more questions. All right. Do people find it confusing to get multiple applications? That's a great question. Yes, and that's one of the reasons why they can find it a little confusing. That's why it's important to really space them out. You don't want to send applications one right after the other. I wouldn't send it one every week. You want to do it every few weeks. And that's also another reason why you want to preview it and have lots of phone calls so that you can do that voter education. I think in states where you haven't had widespread voting by mail, like in Illinois, there is some education to it. People might be like, well, I've already filled out this application. Why am I getting another one? That's why doing that education and calling people and texting them and, previewing to them that information. One thing we do is also sometimes include second notice. So we've done, when we do like a very large program for like a congressional race, we'll send out the first application and we'll just add something that looks like a little stamp that says second notice on the second one. And then for the third one, we'll say final notice as well, just kind of giving a little bit of social pressure and encouraging people to do that, to kind of make a little bit of a distinction that this is another application. Another question, when you say that they can apply online, does that just mean that they can download the application, then email it back, or is it the county clerk required to? I'm not 100% sure. My understanding, and maybe Christina, you know this, my understanding right now, and don't quote me on this, is that there's actually an online application that goes to the Secretary of State, and then they send it to the county clerks. That is completely online. That does not mean that they download it and print it out and send it in, but you're able to completely fill it out online. People can register to vote completely online in Illinois, and the new law dictates that once someone registers to vote, they will be automatically asked if they want a mail-in ballot, and they'll be able to vote by mail. So I believe all of that can be online without printing anything. I also think it's probably best practice to include a link to wherever people can go and do that once that's all been sorted out and there's a best practices place to send people. So include that link on your county websites or on your social media and frequently share it, but also include a link for people who maybe struggle with technology to be able to download a PDF and print it out and send it back in.
Thank you so much, Gillian. I just want to remind folks that if you have any questions, please put it in the group chat there. I wanted to ask, you mentioned layering multiple forms of communication to voters, but if it's a county or campaign that has limited time, resources, volunteers, is there one method that you found is most effective to reaching out that maybe should be prioritized? Absolutely, calls. So it's really calls. Calls indoors, and obviously in a pandemic, we're not going door to door. So really going through that list of people that have gotten an application and calling them, even if you hear that Vote Yes is doing calls, those are paid calls. So they're using a call center, and someone who could be in Alabama or Missouri could be calling them and reminding them that the application is there. That's fine. They should do that. Not everyone's going to answer the phone for every phone call, but if you have a list of people that are
in your county that you know are good Democrats, that you know have gotten an application, you should call them. That is where I would focus my energy. The second thing I would do is a postcard and having it be branded from your county. You can do that really inexpensive. I'm not saying like some pretty, 8.5 by 13 giant postcard, that we all know what those look like. Not something like that, but like really even a 4 by 6 postcard or a 5 by 8, very small, that a volunteer actually writes on and says, I know you may have gotten an application. Please return it. It's, like I live in this county too, and we have so much on the line this election, be sure to return it. That's also something that's really effective. You can actually, one thing I have a couple of clients doing that we've been encouraging people to do, and this has been tested a little bit as well, you can have people start filling out those postcards now, and then you hold on to them and then just send them at the time in which people are going to start getting applications. Likewise for ballots, encouraging people to return ballots, you could actually have postcards filled out that say, please return your ballot. I live down the block from you. It's so important. You can actually save that and hold them at home and then send them out around September 24th when people are actually getting their ballots. Or best practice, obviously sending it out a week later in early October. So that's really a good volunteer activity to do now. Sarah Bingman, is dropping a ballot application at the door with a note effective? Absolutely. I think if you call people and are like, make sure you fill out your vote by mail application, they're like, I don't know if I have one, or blah, 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 I haven't found it. It's saying like, absolutely, I will bring it one to you is very effective. You can even, I know in some places, and obviously depending on, best practices from the Illinois Department of Public Health and kind of what's going on, you could probably fill one out and tell them to go fill it out, and you'll wait in your car while they're filling it out, and then you can pick it up and bring it into the clerk. I think that's something that you could do that's probably really effective for seniors. So I would encourage doing that. The clerk is not required to have an online application, but the Cal County clerk sort of has an online process. They allow the application to be included in an email. Yeah. That's right, Christina. But I do think that there's something with the Secretary of State as well, that it just doesn't go directly to your clerk, so it takes a really long time, and that's the piece that's like not everyone's completely sure about. Is anything changing with the ballot sent returned info in Vote Builder this year from 2 years ago? Not within like who's actually been sent a ballot and who's had the ballot returned, but people who are getting the application, that is different in Vote Builder. And that's what I am not prepared to explain that, nor am I the best person to do that in this current moment. I'm in the process of learning what our good friend Ken Kimber is doing this cycle for. Everyone knows Ken Kimber's name, of course, the guy that administers the Vote Builder for the state of Illinois. So I would definitely check with him. Actually, who's returned the ballot, that information will be in the same place, but knowing who has gotten an application or any of the reminders, that is going to be in a different place. When should the county clerk have applications in mail to voters? When do we know it's lost or gone astray? That's a great question. So let me go back here and flip back up. Dates. Okay, so the key dates. So this is actually one of the best things that Illinois did was legally dictate that information. So the clerk has to send by the clerk has to send by August 1st, a mail-in ballot application, okay? We'll know that it's gone lost or astray probably by like August 7th. If you're calling people and they haven't gotten it, then you know that it got lost or astray. Likewise, if that's one of the things that having this done in August as opposed to September, the original law was to send these out in like early September, which was crazy to think that this process would go efficiently if that was the case. But if you get to like August 15th and you're talking to people and you're calling through them and they're like, I already filled out my application and the data isn't coming back, I would be like, I would check. There might be something, maybe it didn't get back to the clerk, or maybe you didn't sign it, or something's gone wrong. Certainly by Labor Day, if people have gotten an application, and I think by then they'll probably have at least they'll have gotten the one from the county clerk and probably gotten some from Vote Yes or other organizations. If by Labor Day they still don't, it doesn't say that they've that they've requested a ballot, that's when they should probably contact the clerk themselves and see whether or not their application is valid. If a person requests a ballot application and then they decide to early vote at the election authority in person, can they still do that? The answer is yes. Christina Zahorik, do you remember what they said last week, what the process was? I believe they have to surrender. Do they have to surrender their ballot? Yes. Yeah, go ahead, answer that question.
Yeah, so the comment about DeKalb is because Laura's from DeKalb. The situation of if you get a mail-in ballot to you and you decide that you want to either early vote, early satellite vote, or vote on election day, the thing to remember is you just have to surrender that ballot at wherever it is you're going to vote in person at. So bring in that mail-in ballot to wherever it is you're voting. Again, if it's the early vote, whether it's early satellite or actually day of, turn that into the election authority, to the election judges. They rip it up, you know, they put it to the side, and then they give you a new ballot right then and there. So that's the way it works. You just have to, return or give it.
There you go. It's almost the same thing if a ballot is lost in the mail, that you have to, if it's early on, so we know ballots are being sent September 24th and you've requested it, you should contact your county clerk and say, I've requested a ballot and I haven't gotten it. That's one of the other good things in this law is that clerks are required to actually send the ballots to people who have applied by October 1st. So that's really helpful. So if by October 6th you don't get it and you applied in the month of September or August, then that's a really good time to check in with people and make sure that they've got in their actual ballot. If it's closer to election day, everyone should contact their clerk and be like, I requested a ballot and I haven't received it. You can still go and vote in person with a provisional ballot. And there's no reason why that provisional ballot shouldn't count, but they should keep obviously all that information. You'll get a receipt from the county clerk saying that you voted. And if there's an election that's really, really close, which is possible, especially the more local elections we get, we know that that can happen, then there might be some conversation as if that provisional ballot counted. But in Illinois, the law is so friendly to voters, there's no reason why it wouldn't count. And that's also one of the great reasons why, early vote has really been extended, because same applies there. If your ballot's lost, you can go and vote early on election day. Another part of the law is that they have to have a super site within each county on election day. So if the precinct is closed, or if there's an issue, if the line to vote at that precinct is super long, there's probably another place in the county that you can go and vote at. That's just another kind of random tidbit that I think is great. There's places that I think of that as being very effective, like Champaign County. I do Betsy Dirksen-Londrigan's mail. I love Betsy. She has to win. So that is the place where I really think of things like that being really effective. So you should think about where you can mirror that as well in your county. Each election authority gets to choose the early vote dates, right? No, not anymore. No, it's actually set for them, and they're much more expanded. It's pretty much what the city of Chicago and Cook County, pretty much what the city of Chicago does, where, do you have those exact dates in front of you, Christina? I just don't have them written down. I can find them, but then I'd have to stop sharing my screen. We can't hear you. Sorry. Technology.
There you go.
There you go.
Sorry, I'm just trying to click too fast. I want to make a very clear distinction between early vote, early satellite vote, and election day vote, right? Because early vote is the first day that your election authority is required by the law to have voting available, and that's usually at the admin building or where your election authority resides, right? And then the early satellite voting is obviously those places that are elsewhere in your county that are set up, whether they're at other, sometimes they're set up at the village hall somewhere else, or at the library, whatever the case may be, right? So there's a distinct difference between the early vote, which starts September 24th for everybody, and then the early satellite voting offices, I believe, is like October 6th or something like that. I'm going to double check on that, but it's usually that following 2-3 weeks after the early vote starts. So early satellite vote is, I think, what they're asking about. And let me get like the first or that first week of October.
I'm putting my email in the chat. Everyone's welcome to email me whenever you want. Either me or my staff will get back to you. So I know, and I think we're going to mail around a version of this presentation. I made edits from what I originally sent Gillian earlier today, which is my favorite thing to do, is edit things up until the very last minute. So I will send over a revised version of the presentation, and please feel free to reach out to me if you have any. I have to set up a Zoom meeting with some potential voters, so I'm signing off. Great. Thank you. Sorry if you thought it was a question, so I'm reading your stuff that you put in the chat. Yeah, so feel free to reach out if you have more questions on best practices. I am also happy, I'm putting together programs for a couple people who are in the leadership circle for their, you know, if they're the committeeman for their congressional district or a county chair or you know, a committeeman for a ward or whatnot. So a lot of that is pretty formulaic and isn't going to change. So I'm happy to share that information. I'm not saying you have to use my firm for your mail, but I'm happy to share best practices of when you should mail certain things, taking into account all those pieces that I talked about that I know about statewide, and you can just kind of layer in what you know is going on locally within your county. So happy to share that. I am from here, I grew up here, so I feel very strongly about making sure that Democrats win in November. So always, will there be a training on vote builder? I don't know, but Gillian, that's probably other Jillian. That's probably a good, yes, there is. Christina is nodding her head. Yep. So make sure.
Yeah, I will be. We'll be having trainings on that, yes, going forward.
Yeah. And I believe Vote Builder is going to be updated nightly. Usually you get, if you're logged into Vote, if you have an account, you get that email from Ken daily right around 2 p.m. I wait on pins and needles before I refresh data to send mail. So thank you, Sarah.
Thank you so much, Gillian, for joining us here tonight. I do want to let everybody know that this training was recorded, and if everything goes well on the tech side, that should be up by tomorrow afternoon, and everybody will get a version of the slides as well as the video of the training. So if there's anything that you didn't write down or want to go back and review, we'll have that for you. And I also do just want to plug real quick before we sign off for the night. The IDCCA is starting phase 2 of our Recruit, Engage, Vote project, our REV project, starting in the next couple weeks, and we'll actually be calling Democrats around the state to push and encourage people to apply to vote by mail. So if you're interested in that, watch your email, watch social media, and we'll certainly be sending out more information on that soon. All right, if there's no other questions, thank you all for joining us here tonight, and thank you, Gillian and Christina, for joining us as well.